r/no sleep. Posted by u/kherpes. I worked as an ice road trucker in Russia along the Road of Bones. This is why I quit. I immigrated to the United States from Russia 10 years ago, but before that, I was a truck driver. I often drove the route with the seemingly innocuous name of the M56, a road that Stalin had built with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, slaves to the gulags. They were people the state had, in effect, condemned to death, and the state didn't want them back. About half of them died. They froze to death, starved and collapsed from exhaustion, and to this day, many drivers swear they see ghosts on the M56. Traveling up on the M56, I would come to the Kolyma Highway, which translated, means, the Road of Bones. It isn't a metaphor. When the Gulag prisoners died constructing these roads, they wouldn't bury their bodies, due to the permafrost making the ground too hard. So the prisoners' bones were mixed in with the road, and covered over. The road itself literally has the bones of many tens of thousands of people mixed in. To call the M56 or the Road of Bones roads gives the wrong impression, at least on the last time I drove the route, back in 2010. It isn't a paved road, but covered in stones laid thickly over the Siberian dirt that turns into quicksand when it rains. The M56 runs straight north into Siberia, and there are still countless deaths on this road. It often washes out, and portions of the road used to just collapse. Massive dust storms sweep across it, causing collisions and deaths as trucks and cars swerved into trees, or passed into the other side of the road. And my cargo was entirely uninsured. I drove with tons of beer in glass bottles in the back, some of which ended up shattering from the endless vibrations of driving over the sharp rocks all over the road, which also ended up slicing up my tires. I would go through over 15 tires a month, sometimes 25. Take a truck loaded with between 15 to 18 tons of beer and blow out a tire, and you could be sitting on an instantaneous fatal crash waiting to happen. All down the M56 you would see thousands and thousands of discarded tires on the sides of the road. As for the beer, the people living in northern Siberia loved beer. I think they drank it more than water. Beer is more popular there than vodka, despite the fact it's in Russia. Maybe beer is cheaper than bottled water. In some places, it is. The story of my encounter on the M56 started before I had stopped at the warehouse dock to load up 15 tons of beer in my aging, second-hand Japanese truck. It started when I saw a man standing outside, just staring at me. He had very dark eyes, and a round Siberian face with ruddy cheeks. He wore a fur jacket, but I couldn't tell which animal it could have come from. He looked bundled up, with sweaters and multiple layers of pants. The fur coat also included a hood, which still had the face of the animal attached, though flattened and distorted. I immediately recognized that it had come from a brown bear. I got out of my truck, lighting up a cigarette, and I started walking in his direction, pulling my jacket closed and putting a thick, woolen hat on my head. The wind whipped crazily all around me, sending the snow sideways and directly into my face. I cursed, trying to turn my head. The front door stood just beside the strange man, and I needed to go inside. Might as well start the paperwork now, I figured. The man just kept staring, however, even as I got near. I was about to ask if he had a problem, when he started speaking. "You are going on Kolyma, the Road of Bones?" he asked. "Yes, I take the M56 north first," I said. "That is my job. I travel here and travel there. As long as most of the cargo doesn't get broken or fall off the truck, I make a decent living." "You should not go alone," he said. "The Road of Bones will break you. It will crush you, as it crushed the bones of those who built it. You will not survive this journey, my friend." "Not alone," I laughed, but a chill ran down my spine. "What are you, some kind of Siberian shaman?" I asked. He smiled, but said nothing. "Are you a psychic, friend? Do you tell me my future?" "I only tell you the truth," he said. "No more and no less." Many thought they would survive the Road of Bones. Most still lay there, skulls eternally grinning under the wheels that pass over them. "So what are you asking me?" I said. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "But if you want any chance to survive, I should come with you. I will travel with you to Magadan, at the end of the Road of Bones, and then you will be free. You will have seen the true nature of the Road of Bones, and maybe, you'll be alive." I squinted at the man, wondering if I was talking to a madman or a drunkard, but he seemed completely coherent and logical. I wondered if maybe this was just the strangest hitchhiking ruse anyone had ever dreamed up. I stepped back, feeling cold. The smell of fumes from the other trucks pulling into the warehouse parking lot mixed with the scent of the evergreens that surrounded us here at the edge of town. "What's your name?" I asked him, looking closer at the skin on his fur coat. It looked like bear. It felt too hot standing next to the heat of the warehouse to be wearing fur. "Yakov," he said. "In my town, they call me Yakov the Seer." I suppressed a slight smile at this. "Yakov, my name is Nikolai. Yes, I am a truck driver. Why do you not just ask me for a ride?" "Because I want you to prepare yourself," he said cryptically, and then he would say nothing else on the subject, but simply told me he would come back once my cargo was loaded. I smiled and shook his hand, but as I walked away, I felt him staring at my back. Goosebumps rose on my arms and legs, and I wondered whether I had made the right call. Soon, the truck was loaded, and I was ready to leave the lot. I stood in front of the door and looked around Yakov, but the thick snow obscured my vision. I couldn't see farther than 15 or 20 feet in any direction. Shrugging, I pulled myself into the driver's seat and pulled the door close. The warm air from the truck made my dangling toes and fingers warm up. I took off my snow-covered jacket and hat. The smell of wet wool still reminds me of winter to this day. Then there was a sudden rapping at my window. I jumped, reaching under my seat for my P96 pistol, which I always kept loaded and hidden in case of bandits. But as I looked, I saw Yakov's round, serious face looking in at me. I sighed, motioning for him to go around and get in. Because this was an old Japanese truck, it meant that the driver and passenger sides were switched from typical US or Russian convention, even though I still drove on the right side of the road. Yakov had a small, leather sack with him that bulged with his few possessions. He sat down, looked over at me, and gave me a faint smile. "Let's go," he said. "We have a very long ride." Indeed, we did at least 72 hours up to Yakutsk, where I would drop off the entire load of beer, and then a trip from Yakutsk to Magadan, which could take another 5 days. I then had to pick up another load in Magadan, a contract I had already accepted. They expected me there in 8 days. I would have to drive, perhaps, 17 or 18 hours a day to make it in time. I set off slowly, the wind howling outside and the snow quickly covering the windshield. As I puttered down the paved road and towards the M56, Yakov told me a story. "I used to be a driver on the M56 as well," Yakov said. "One time, I had a load of vodka to transport to Yakutsk. It was summer. Dust blew so thickly across the road that I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. I was afraid I would go off the road and flip the truck. Night had started to fall, so I pulled over on the side of the road and fell asleep. I awoke to a tapping on the door. I looked out, but no one stood there. I wondered if it was a trick. Bandits are known to rob truckers along these roads, as you know, and sometimes they even block the road with disabled vehicles to force the trucker to stop. Then they come out, drunk and armed, and steal whatever he's transporting." I nodded. I had heard many such stories. "I had an old Makarov pistol, must have been from the time of Stalin himself," he laughed. "But I'll tell you, the Makarov is a good gun. As long as you clean it and take care of it, it lasts a long time. Just like the AK-47. Cheap and durable." I grabbed my Makarov and a flashlight and began to shine the light out the windows. The dust had greatly receded, and now I could see at least 30 or 40 feet in every direction. To my amazement, I saw people working, in the middle of the night. But they looked strange and ethereal. They dug at the road with their hands, using half-broken shovels and rocks and ancient, rusted wheelbarrows to move the dirt. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was just dreaming. I saw the identification sewn into the back of their jackets, a series of numbers that would replace that person's name, as they used to do in the gulags. I started my truck, intending to get the hell out of there, and as soon as the engine made a noise, they all turned to look at me. They had woolen caps and thinly padded jackets, with holes in their pants. None wore gloves. They shivered, trembling, even though it was warm out at the time. And then I noticed the horrific wounds each of them had. Many had gunshot wounds to the head, while others had crushed arms or hands. Each looked like a skeleton, starved nearly to death. They were all dead. They had to be. I drove forwards, hoping they would move out of the way, but they didn't. Very slowly, I drove towards one of the men in the group, one whose face had been destroyed by a gunshot wound, turned into a mask of bone splinters and gore. He just stared up at me as I approached. I kept moving forward slowly, and I passed right through him. By the time I had gotten a few dozen feet up, I turned around, and saw they were all gone. We had come onto the M56 by this point, and the whole truck vibrated horribly, shaking on the loose dirt and stones that comprised the road. I looked over at Yakov for a moment, wondering if he was pulling my leg. "Haven't you ever seen anything?" he asked. "Well, I have, but not ghosts," I said. Not the ghosts of Stalinism. I opened a fresh pack of cigarettes, taking one out and lighting it. I rolled down the window slightly. The bitterly cold wind began to whip into the truck, raising goosebumps all over my body. A cold wave of dread went down my spine, but for another reason. I didn't want to think of the story. And yet I told it anyway. It was winter, very cold, just like now. I was driving down the M56 and found a car on the side of the road. Its hazards were on, and its engine was not running. We never turn our engines off here in the winter, because they won't start again in the freezing cold. Not at -60 or -70 with the wind chill. I instantly knew the driver was in trouble. I pulled the truck over and got out. I examined the car, and saw the windows smashed, shards of broken glass all over the seats and floor. And the driver's seat, it looked like it was covered in blood. And yet, no driver. I checked under the car and looked in the nearby forest, shining my flashlight through the trees. I called out for the driver, asking if he was hurt. For a long moment, no one answered me. And then I heard it. An answer, very faint but with each of the words still recognizable. "Please," it said, "I'm hurt. Come deeper into the woods and help me." Its voice did not sound normal. At first, I wondered if it was just the voice of an injured man, but it had a hissing quality, a low, gurgling tone. I tried to think fast, and simply called out a question. "Did you get in a car crash?" I asked. "What happened?" The voice came back again after a few long seconds of silence. And it just said the same thing, in the same identical cadence and speed, as if a recording played in the woods on repeat. "Please, I'm hurt. Come deeper into the woods and help me." At that point, I decided that I would leave immediately. Something felt wrong with the situation. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my intuition screamed at me that something didn't add up. I turned to go, and on the other side of the road, I saw, well, something. I'm not sure what it was. It was like a man, but hairless, its skin shrunken and pale, totally bleached white against its bones. It looked starved, its knees knobby, its legs just consisting of bones wrapped with skin, like white sticks. Standing there totally naked, without sex organs, without eyebrows, its nose and ears missing, I wondered if it was human at all. Now, looking back on it, I know it was not. Its eyes looked like shining orbs of pure blackness, huge pools of liquid black that stared at me, unblinking. And then it opened its mouth, showing many twisted and crooked yellow teeth. "Please, I'm hurt," it said, never changing its expression. It sounded like a recording. And I heard the same words behind me, coming from the forest. "Please," another one said, maybe only 10 feet behind me from the sound. I ran towards my truck, and I heard footsteps behind me, at least 2 pairs and maybe more. I didn't look back. I ran for my life and flung open the door. Just as I was closing it, a hand grabbed my leg. I shrieked, trying over and over again to close the door. I kept slamming against the thin, long white hand that had me. Eventually, it let go, and I started the truck and got out of there. When I looked back, I saw dozens of pairs of black eyes, staring at me, unblinking.